Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we are unpacking the ultimate biological mystery. How does a delicate, almost fragile-looking creature manage to thrive in literally the single most hostile environment on Earth? We're taking a plunge straight down into the Hadal Zone, the absolute deepest, darkest trenches of our oceans, to uncover the snailfish's secret survival tools. Right off the bat, let's hit you with a staggering number, 840. When you drop down over 8,000 meters into the ocean's Hadal Zone, the atmospheric pressure hits a mind-bending 840 bar. That's 84 megapascals. To put that in perspective for us up here on dry land, that is over 800 times the atmospheric pressure that you and I are experiencing right now at sea level. And this sets up a massive biological paradox. How exactly does a fragile fish survive down there? Think about it. When humans want to visit these depths, we have to build submarines with heavily engineered, crazy thick metal hulls just to avoid being instantly crushed. And yet, here is this small, pale, seemingly delicate organism living its entire life down there without an ounce of metal armor. Section 1. The deepest fish on Earth. Let's meet the Hadal snailfish. What's absolutely fascinating here is just how rapidly this fish conquered the abyss. It was discovered navigating the extreme depths of the Mariana Trench, totally unbothered by conditions that would pulverize pretty much any other organism on the planet. And its genomic data tells an incredible story. They actually diverged from their shallow water ancestors about 20 million years ago, sure, but they successfully spread across multiple Pacific trenches within just the last 1 million years. That is quite literally the blink of an eye in evolutionary time to master an environment this lethal. So how did they pull this off? Section 2. Crushing the pressure problem. Try to picture this. The pressure down there is equal to the weight of 1,000 1.5-ton cars concentrated onto an area of just 0.18 square meters. It's almost unimaginable. But here's the trick. The snailfish is not holding up the entire ocean on its back like some sort of mythological titan. The sea is pressing in from every direction at once, inside and out. To handle that omnidirectional force, the snailfish completely threw out the standard shallow water fish blueprint. Shallow fish have rigid bones, enclosed skulls, and gas-filled swim bladders to control their buoyancy. But if you took a gas bladder down to 8,000 meters, total violent implosion. So the Hadal snailfish entirely abandoned the swim bladder. Through evolution, it actually lost specific genes like BGLP, TMEM251, and TMEM263, which dramatically reduced its bone mineralization. It now has an incompletely ossified skull, and it relies heavily on watery, gelatinous tissues instead. Since water is largely incompressible, the fish's internal pressure simply matches the outside ocean. No pressure difference, no crushing. But hey, pressure isn't the only nightmare down there. Section 3. Surviving in total darkness. Living in pitch black requires a huge evolutionary trade-off. The snailfish actually completely lost the genes for color vision, specifically LWS and RH2. It even dumped circadian rhythm genes like PIR2A and CRY1A because, well, when you live in permanent darkness, your body doesn't really need to sync with the sun anymore. However, it smartly kept the RH1 gene, allowing it to perceive very, very dim light. More importantly, though, it massively upregulated its auditory system, specifically the TMC1 gene. It essentially traded its sight for a highly refined sense of hearing. Which brings us to the number 3. The Hadal snailfish has 3 copies of a very specific gene called CLDJN. Why is that a big deal? Well, this gene is crucial for building otoliths. Those are the dense calcium carbonate structures in the inner ear that fish use for hearing and balance. Normally, below a certain depth called the carbonate compensation depth, calcium carbonate just dissolves. It's a chemical rule. But by having 3 copies of this gene, the snailfish literally breaks the depth limitation, allowing it to build and maintain these vital ear bones where it should be chemically impossible. Let's zoom in a bit closer. Section 4. TMAO, the chemical shield. Because without this next adaptation, the fish's cells would physically collapse. To really grasp this, we need to introduce a biological term, piezolite. See, at 800 atmospheres of pressure, the sheer physical weight of the water actually forces complex proteins inside your cells to warp, fold incorrectly, and just stop working. A piezolite is a specialized molecule that acts like a structural brace, protecting those proteins from distorting under extreme hydrostatic pressure. For the snailfish, that magic piezolite is trimethylamine N oxide, or just TMAO for short.
This chemical shield is so incredibly concentrated in the tissues of the Hadal snailfish that it physically wedges itself into the proteins. It braces them against the crushing weight of the ocean, successfully restoring critical enzyme functions that would absolutely fail otherwise.
Now, bracing proteins is huge, but it's just one part of the puzzle. Section 5. Genetic armor and cell survival. The snailfish also had to solve the problem of cold and pressure literally freezing its cell membranes solid. So it expanded its genetic toolkit. A standard teleost fish has about 5 copies of the ACAO1 fatty acid gene. The Hadal snailfish, it is rocking an incredible 15 copies. Combined with the FASN gene, this massive expansion pumps their cells full of unsaturated fatty acids. Because these unsaturated fats have little bends and kinks in their molecular chains, they keep the cell membranes wonderfully fluid, flexible, and fully functional in an environment that is incredibly cold and rigid. And the genetic upgrades just keep coming. Extreme pressure causes a really dangerous biological side effect, a massive burst of reactive oxygen species, or ROS. This stuff can literally shred a cell's DNA. Now, if you look at a shallow water relative like Tanaka snailfish, it has just 3 copies of the FTHL27 gene, but our Hadal snailfish boasts 14 copies. This gene produces ferritin, and having this massive expansion acts as literal genetic armor. It soaks up oxidative stress and protects the fish from pressure-induced cellular damage. We also can't forget about the food supply. Down in the deepest trenches, meals are seriously few and far between. By dropping the GPR27 gene entirely, the snailfish actually triggers a spike in the CPT1 gene, which heavily enhances lipid beta oxidation. What does that mean in plain English? It supercharges the fish's ability to metabolize fats. It makes them hyper-efficient at storing energy, so they can easily survive those long, extreme periods of starvation in the deep. But nature always exacts a toll, doesn't it? Section 6. The ultimate depth limit. There is a really tragic irony baked into the snailfish's biology. As depth increases, the pressure increases. And as pressure increases, the fish requires more and more TMAO to brace its proteins. But here's the catch. TMAO is a solute. The more TMAO the fish packs into its tissues, the more the concentration of its internal fluids starts matching the salty seawater outside. Eventually, the cells become isoosmotic, meaning they entirely lose their internal water balance. Which leads us to a hard, unyielding biological boundary, 8,200 to roughly 8,500 meters. This is the exact depth limit where the amount of TMAO required to survive the crushing pressure makes a bony fish completely isoosmotic. It's a strict chemical wall. You simply can't keep adding TMAO indefinitely without destroying the fish's basic fluid balance. It proves there is an absolute non-negotiable limit for this type of vertebrate biology. And that leaves us with a truly fascinating question to wrap up on. If the absolute hard limit for a bony fish is 8,500 meters, what on earth is swimming around at the very bottom of the Mariana Trench at 11,000 meters? Has some entirely unknown, completely alien-like form of life found a whole new biochemical trick to bypass this limit? The deeper we look, the more mysteries our oceans reveal. Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer today. And as always, stay curious.